and welcome to the Teaching Together podcast, where we celebrate and share the glows and grows of teacher life. I'm Grace.
And I'm Sierra. Each episode on the show, we love to start with a glow or grow, something that's been happening for us in our teacher lives or teaching weeks. So, Grace, do you have something to kick us off with today?
I just have a really cute anecdote, very brief. I was sitting at my desk and one of my very bright students came up to me and he says, "Miss Keane, I know you're very forgetful, so I'm just going to remind you now that you told me I could play with my toy at recess." And I was like, honestly, that's really helpful. Thank you so much, because I am so forgetful.
I had a similar situation today when I had my year 10 class and I said to them, right, just before we do anything, I have to mark the roll because I'm actually hopeless and I will forget. And one of the girls started laughing at me as if she's like, yeah, you are hopeless. And I was like, stop giggling because I know why you're giggling.
Oh, wow. Absolutely savage.
It was a little bit savage. But as an actual glow, I am really, really enjoying my new year 7 class that I've had for, a little over half a term now. And I really think I just hit the jackpot with both of my year 7 classes. They are just quite delightful.
Aww.
And I think for me, a real glow has been teaching this unit for the 3rd time through now. It just makes such a difference to feel like you're not clueless.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
And running by the seat of your pants kind of thing. This is my 3rd run through this project and I just am already feeling like the way that I'm delivering it is just so much more smooth and calm and everybody's keeping up. And I mean, I know there's a long way to go, but it's just so, comforting and enjoyable to feel like as you reflect and refine your practice, that things actually go better.
Yes. And yes, I have found that being in my 2nd year of teaching and 2nd year of kindergarten, consecutive year of kindergarten. Yeah. Just not having to do everything for the first time and going, oh, yeah, actually, I remember doing that. And here is how it worked and here's how it didn't work. And here's what I need to be aware of. Yeah, I definitely... Oh, I really relate. Yeah, it's nice to get better, and it's kind of reinforced to me that, I'm not actually supposed to be perfect at everything the very first time. Just because I'm the teacher does not mean that I won't benefit from practice as well. So when I found out I was going to be on kindergarten again this year, I was kind of like, I don't know if I could do that again. It was so exhausting. But it's been really good to have another go. And I could happily sit on kindergarten for a few more years and just get really good at, my school's specific programs and the way we do kindergarten. It would be nice to, after doing placement and all that stuff at uni for years, it'd be nice to feel like I know what I'm doing.
Yes, because so often as teachers, we have to just be good at adapting and just rolling with whatever's in front of us. And that's still such an important skill, but I think it allows you to do that better when you're not also trying to sort of be learning the content. And, I say that because I know that people who are listening will understand. It's not like you're learning the content as if you have no idea what you're teaching or what's going on, but just, the flow of things and working out, oh my goodness, the instructions that way just did not work, or that was too confusing, or, this is now my 5th year of teaching full time, and only now am I starting to feel like I'm having enough repeats of things. I've now taught 4 HSC classes of 4 different year groups or subjects. I've really never had a go at repeating things to actually solidify what I'm doing and my practice in delivering that particular unit. And so, anyway, that's a real highlight of the year so far for me.
Yeah, same. We have a shared glow.
A shared glow. Well, last episode, I had the absolute joy and privilege of speaking with Christine from the Writing Revolution. I must say I felt like a little bit of a celebrity getting to speak to someone in another time zone. It was the coolest thing.
With an American accent.
With an American accent, that's right. So Christine was super helpful, and I love the writing revolution, if you haven't sort of picked that up from some of our episodes before. So highly recommend going to have a listen through that if you haven't already. Christine gives some great insight just into the Hockman method approach to teaching writing and how we can really integrate that into teaching everything else that we have to do, rather than sort of seeing writing and literacy as kind of their own separate thing that has to somehow fit in with everything else that we're doing. So it was really helpful. It was a fantastic conversation. So make sure you go and have a listen.
On today's podcast, we're going to have a rethink of the established categories of assessment that you might be familiar with as an Australian teacher, and what they can be used for, and that kind of thing. But first, it's time for tea.
Today, I am very excited to share with Grace one of my absolute favourite teas of the moment. In the January school holidays, I went for a trek into the city to a store called the Tea Centre, which was just a fabulous experience. It's kind of like T2, but
It's bougie.
it's a bit more bougie.
I haven't been there, but I'm now putting it on my to-do list.
Look, it was really fun, and the one thing that I really would have liked is to have a few more taste tests. Like, you could smell everything, but you couldn't always taste. But one of the teas I picked up while I was there was this pina colada tea, which I have been really enjoying. It's very summery, very fruity, and that is not at all Grace's style, but I've insisted that she try it. So, Grace, I'm very intrigued to know, how are you finding the pina colada?
It kind of reminds me of the pumping pomegranate from T2. It is very full on. I mean, we did steep our tea for a little longer than normal because I kind of forgot about it. But it's very full on, but it's very fun.
And it would be really good cold as well. It does have that pomegranate colour, but I know that it's got like dried pineapple and coconut and things through it as well to try and give that pina colada vibe. But it is probably a bit more tropical, perhaps.
It's definitely tropical. I mean, I'm having a fun time drinking it. My taste buds are dancing, so
That's
if this was an ad, there'd be people dancing on water. You know, those ads. It's like, I feel like old Shapes ads or something.
Yes, I think it was a shape. The people were dancing on the shape, though.
They were dancing on the shape. Yeah, they were dancing on people's taste buds. But, you know, my taste buds are alive. They're singing.
All right, let's move on. Well, I would love to get stuck into a chat about some formative and summative assessment. I am really interested to hear some of your thoughts on this, Grace, but I have been reading a lot of articles recently as I've been doing some extra study on the nature of formative and summative assessment, and also how assessment fits in with our social and cultural expectations of what learning is. And it has really prompted me to have some like really big thoughts about assessment and what on earth I'm doing in my class, because I think we so easily just we arrive in a place, a school, a setting, a part of the world with like a particular, I guess, approach or view on what's normal or what the expectations are around learning. And it has been really interesting for me over the last couple of weeks to really think through how I use assessment and why I use assessment. And we've talked lots before already about kind of some of my different approaches to assessment marking and feedback and some of those sorts of things. But it has really challenged me to think about how some of the ideas that I already had about assessment are sort of backed up by some research, which was, you know, a nice little validation moment, but also to be really challenged on why I do certain things. And am I just going with the flow, or am I just trying to meet expectations without actually really thinking about the why? So I feel like, I mean, I don't know whether it was just my initial teacher education or whether this is kind of a global experience, but I really feel like we don't learn heaps about this sort of stuff.
I am in the same boat. I mean, we are, the same generation of teacher. So that might be, a thing with our, initial teacher education, like you just said.
But we did go to different universities.
Yeah, so very true. And you're 3 years ahead. You graduated 3 years before I did. But we actually were looking at assessment in my kindy team just this week at work. And I was thinking, well, I don't really know what are we doing with assessment? Like, I don't know, because like I've mentioned many a time, we are writing our own programs at the moment because my school is brand new. And we because we really felt like we were behind last year, constantly trying to catch up, we really left assessment to the end and sometimes didn't really have what you would call a formal or formative assessment at the end of a unit. I mean, we didn't really have what you would call a summative assessment at the end of a unit. And part of that, I think, is because the nature of inquiry learning is there's lots of formative assessment or informal assessment or assessment as learning, all those kinds of buzzwords. When students are creating work samples or when they are responding to a question with a think, pair, share or something like that, we're getting immediate feedback on what they know and what they've understood, which is part of our purpose of assessment. And we were just this week writing a summative assessment for our big integrated unit, which is on the theme of identity and community. And my grade leader said, oh, that's a really good way for us to see, have they understood? And so that clearly was her philosophy for why we were doing assessment, why we were designing this summative assessment was, have they understood what we've been trying to teach them? And the way that we were going to assess that was we were going to get some stage 2 students, so year 3 and 4, to come down and interview our kindy kids with a set of questions that us teachers have written that address a variety of parts of the unit. So we're not even going to be interviewing every student. We'll be floating. And so it's a very informal summative task. But the idea is that the students are able to verbalize what they know, which is one of the key ways that we do that in kindergarten because we don't have a grasp on writing sentences yet. And the way that lots of our kiddos think best is just to talk out loud. Yeah, so that it just really thinking about assessment made me realize that we haven't really done much summative or formal assessment tasks for like the whole of last year in kindy because we were gauging our students' understanding at so many other intervals. And so I think that probably reveals what my school's approach to assessment is, that we use it to understand what our students understand and whether we've taught the content well.
I want to know then, at that point, if you make an assessment that maybe your students haven't understood it as well as you would have thought they had, do you think that would then have any impact on your trajectory with those students, or would it be more a retrospective thing that you might think about later in relation to how you might teach that unit again?
It would be more related to the future of the unit. So it would likely influence the types of inquiry questions we ask or how we scaffold the students' understanding to get to the generalization, which is the culmination of a unit in inquiry learning. Because these kind of quote-unquote formal summative assessments are happening at the end of the unit, we don't have a lot of time to go back. And I would like to think that, as I said before, there's lots of opportunities to gauge student understanding kind of built into the unit with the different activities we do. So we're constantly getting some feedback on what students are understanding. So I would like to think that we'd be able to adjust our teaching
as you're going through all of that.
Yeah. I would like to think in an ideal world, but there are some things that may not be addressed until that summative assessment. And in that case, it's like, well, I know what not to do next year, basically.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I certainly have felt like up until this point, and the way that you're speaking about that, I think is the way that most teachers speak about assessment, and certainly the way that I've heard them talk about it, is that a task can be distinctly summative or formative. It's like, oh, I'm doing a formative task by just, having some, an exit ticket, say. That might be considered to be a formative task. Or an end of term exam or, an end of unit interview is we need to do a summative task and we need to have a formal assessment. One of the things I've found really challenging as I've been reading this week is that a task in itself is not distinctively summative or formative. And I think that when I first read that, I was kind of a little bit like, what? Like that is really different to the language around assessment that we hear in school and from NESA and all of these sorts of things. We kind of feel like they're very separate things. Formative is on the go and summative is at the end. Like that's kind of just how it always feels. But there's an article I've been spending a lot of time in lately called Classroom Assessment and Pedagogy, and it's written by Paul Black and Dylan William, who are, as I'm learning, quite big names in this sort of formative and summative domain. And they actually argue that if the purpose of assessment is to make inferences about student learning, which is exactly what you're saying the purpose of assessment is, that it's not actually the task itself that can be defined as formative or summative. It's the inferences that you draw from the task that are either formative or summative, which made me stop and think, because we use lots of strategies for that sort of on the go, let me draw some inferences here about what you know. Are we using whiteboards? Are we doing one-on-one check-ins? Are we asking questions, think pair shares, checking in their workbooks, all those kinds of things that we know that we can kind of put under that formative umbrella? Because those same tasks, asking students a question or having them write information in a book, are the same style of tasks that we sometimes use for summative assessments. So it's not that the task is discretely formative or summative, but the inferences that we're drawing from it. It made me really think about how with a lot of my assessments, and it's one of the reasons that I love my subject area, and it's sort of very similar but progressive structure all the way through from year 7 to year 12, is that every time my students do, say, a formal assessment task where they submit something to be marked and graded, I always try, when I'm giving feedback, to focus the feedback on the thing that I know that they'll actually be able to take with them and apply to the next task. And as I'm looking at that, I'm still making formative inferences from their, what we would perhaps call summative tasks. When I thought of that, I was like, oh, I kind of already try to do that. I try and make my summative tasks as formative as possible in terms I don't want, what's the point of giving them all this information on what they can and can't do from the task and then just going, all right, well, let's stop there and we'll move on to something new and you'll never have to do that again.
Yeah.
You want the feedback that you give your students to actually move their learning forward, not just be a statement of what they have or haven't done.
And that makes me consider, which I think you're saying, the purpose of assessment is also just to give feedback to students on something they've done in a way that you can, have a look at after they've done it and say, okay, here's we're practicing this skill in woodwork or something. Here's how you can improve that going from year 7 to year 8. And not just, I need a result for your report, but how you're going in this skill. And we've actually had a couple of brief conversations about this in our every couple of weeks we have a whole junior school meeting. And when it comes to reports, we have tried a couple of times to get some student work samples from pre-K all the way to year 4, because year 5 at my school is middle school. So that's a different faculty. And we put the work samples in order from pre-K to year 4 and have a look at the progression across the years. And, this is the spectrum of student achievement from the beginning of their schooling to, at the end of primary school. And I can see us, if we did that better and more intentionally and spent more time working on that, we could create a continuum where all of the teachers in our junior school know where their students are coming from and where they're going and can give feedback, like you're saying, that is designed to improve their future performance when they're not my student anymore. And this is when I pull my soapbox out and get on top of it and grab my megaphone and start ranting about standardized testing because
rant away.
I think if you're a regular listener, I think you can probably guess what our stance towards standardized testing is. And this week at my school, well, in schools across New South Wales, NAPLAN is occurring. And Sarah, you have regular experience with the HSC.
I do.
And if we're talking about assessment as a way to see what students know and how they can improve in the future, I feel like standardized testing doesn't really help that.
It's really interesting that you brought that up, and I'm really glad that you did because in addition to this kind of reading that I've been doing about formative, summative assessment, it's been positioned in the idea of learning about different educational ideologies and what different people believe education is for. So we can't really make a determination on the how and why of assessment without some sort of direction about the how and why of education. You know what I mean? And so there's a few different sort of ideologies out there on the purposes of education. There's this one guy called Shiro who kind of summarizes lots of people's different ideologies and the sort of different existing stances out there into kind of a few main categories. One of the big ones would be the scholar academic category or ideal about education. You know, it's all about, you know, the content, the facts, the knowledge. And then there's another one that's called the learner-centered ideology, which probably relates a bit more to your school's educational ideology, and certainly where I felt like I was at as a beginning teacher, as a pre-service teacher. You know, this idea that I was really struck after my HSC about the idea of wanting everyone who goes through schools, like it's amazing really the fact that all the kids in Australia get to go to school.
Yeah.
And for so many of them, it's just a painful, unpleasant, boring and unmotivating experience at some point. Maybe not the whole journey, but so many people like have their learning journey tainted by those kinds of emotions. If it's not those, it's like extreme stress and anxiety and like performance pressures. And this is all coming from like, you know, our culture, which is really, really focused on performance standards. And I was really shocked to read, again, a couple of articles. I'll link them down below in the show notes for anyone who might be minutely interested. But I'd never come across this word before, which maybe is showing the fact that I perhaps live a little bit under a rock. Neoliberalism.
Well, I did do a social sciences degree for 18 months, so I've definitely heard of it.
You're much more familiar with it than me. I was kind of like, yeah, I think I've heard of this, but I really have no idea what it means. And it's kind of born out of the business world. And basically there's a lot of evidence to suggest that, especially after the global financial crisis, that a lot of the sort of underpinning foundations and concepts about how like businesses should be run and societies should be run is unsurprisingly impacting the way that education is run in certain countries. And so as a business, you would know that, you know, you've got KPIs and sort of performance indicators and outputs that have to be met, and you kind of have to like prove yourself in those instances. And if you want to be promoted, you've got to show that you're better than other people. And normally that's because of quantifiable evidence. And so that kind of mentality has started, well, it's really infiltrated like most of Western culture.
Yeah.
And we can't be surprised at the fact that it's also infiltrated education. And so being situated in that context when you're saying things like, what really is the purpose of standardized assessment, I think that a lot of teachers would say at the end of the day, the results we get from standardized assessment kind of mean nothing for our kids. It doesn't do anything really to move our learners forward. Rarely. I know that that's part of why they've moved NAPLAN earlier in the year to try and get results to teachers faster, to give them an actual opportunity to maybe act on the data. But certainly with things like the HSC and PISA testing, which we've spoken about on earlier episodes, all of that is just for the purpose of being able to rank people against each other and rank schools and rank countries against each other.
Because someone has to be the winner.
Someone has to be the winner. And performance matters. And there's this guy who calls this idea performativity. And so because of performativity, we as teachers are now having to adapt what we're doing to make sure that we get quantifiable outcomes. And it reduces our professional judgment and all the other things, all those formative assessments that we make about what our students know and have been able to do that they couldn't do a few weeks ago, and all those things that we can assess in ways that aren't numerical, aren't good enough for a lot of people.
Which is so frustrating because teaching is inherently a qualitative profession, building rapport with your students and helping them develop self-efficacy, our favorite word, and the habits of mind that I bang on about all the time. Those are all qualitative dispositions that you can describe, but we're not ranking students on a scale of 1 to 10 for how well they strive for accuracy or respond with wonderment and awe. And some rhetoric that I definitely agree with is that I would like my students to be lifelong learners who didn't just, like I did in the HSC, memorize a bunch of stuff and then forget it, which is what things like the HSC and NAPLAN are designed. That's the behavior that they encourage, whether intentionally or not. And it just isn't very helpful in producing capable citizens and, high school graduates who are actually useful and can pursue jobs and careers that they're interested in rather than doing a menial kind of repetitive labor that they might not be interested in, because they don't have the skills to interact with other adults or, get book their car in for a service or, just make a phone call and interact with humans. And school is a training ground for socialization as well as education. And you can't the soapbox is getting tall now, but I just
keep going.
It frustrates me so much because the HSC is supposed to be this culminating assessment of your entire schooling career. And all I did for my HSC was memorize a bunch of facts and essays that I then went and regurgitated and slightly changed to address the question. And then was so traumatized that I couldn't eat. And obviously sleep was a whole thing. And I developed actual diagnosed anxiety because of the performance pressure for this assessment that means nothing, because when I enrolled in my teaching degree, I was one of those people who got a very high A time and didn't know what to do with it. So I enrolled in a law degree and then realized that wasn't what I wanted to do. And then I became a teacher. I get so sad for my past self, for 17-year-old Grace, because I was just putting so much pressure on myself beyond what my school or teachers or, the HSC were putting on me. It broke me. It really just was awful. My HSC year was the worst year of my life to date, and I hope that it remains that way. But school should not be like that. school is a place where we can practice socializing and learn a bunch of skills and try all the different technology electives and, become human beings. And in Australia, we are very privileged that we have access to so many resources where we can make this happen for students. And I'm not a parent looking to enroll my child in a school. But if I were to become a parent looking to enroll my child in a school, it would be the qualitative data that I would be more concerned with. Like, what kind of person is my child going to be? Because Google exists. I don't need to know a bunch of facts. I do need to know how to research. I need to know how to determine fake news from real news. I need to know how to ethically use AI. I need to know how to interact with other people. But if I don't know what the deepest point of the ocean is, Google does. Like, I don't need to know how to drive anywhere because Google will tell me. Like, what a time to be alive, guys.
I think if I just slide back on the soapbox just a couple of minutes, because you did a beautiful job. But you said that school is about socialization and education. And I'm just also delighted that you said that, because that was one of the other ideologies that this Shiro guy summarizes, to sort of say that, like, social efficiency is another ideology that people have about the purpose of education. Are we educating our students so that they will be effective and efficient citizens and members of society? Even though I think there's a lot of people who would say, yeah, we want students to come out of school as good citizens and we want them to come out as, efficient and effective humans. It's like, but we still want them to get great ATARs. And we still want them to, smash their HSC. And there's all this pressure on that. And I know that certain places will put more or less emphasis on that. And ultimately that comes down to the ideology that's held by the school and the organisation and the people that decide to be part of that school community.
Yes, which is why I'm so grateful to be working at the school I'm working at. And when we're talking about, like, performance, a focus on performance and performance indicators and stuff like that, I just immediately think my, crippling perfectionism that I had in high school was enabled by a performance-based culture.
Honestly, I think that's why I thrived.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I totally, I killed it in the HSC. Like, we both did. We did very well and school was a place that I really thrived in. But I felt that everything I did needed to be perfect. There was no room for making mistakes at all. I was actually having a conversation with my boyfriend over the phone today because he had a job interview, and he was telling me some of the answers that he gave, and he was talking about how he was really bad. He's an engineer, by the way, and he was really bad at, wiring cars, and he's super into cars and things, and he was really bad at that. So what he did was he just practiced a bunch and made a bunch of mistakes and actually ended up enrolling in a mechatronics degree so that he could learn. And, trial and error were his friends.
That's such a massive commitment.
I know, right?
Enroll in a mechatronics degree so I can learn this one thing that I want to nail. That's awesome.
I was like, sorry, what? But I kind of just stopped for a second in my thoughts and was like, he is not afraid to make a mistake. How refreshing. I am still terrified of making a mistake because I think I'm still unlearning 8 years on. I'm unlearning the way that I did school, but he is just like, mistakes are part of learning, and I'll just keep making mistakes until I stop making mistakes. And he's restoring this car at the moment, and he said, he's got to take it for a test drive so he knows everything that's wrong with it so we can fix it. And I was like, things are going to be wrong with it, and you're okay with that? And that's just part of the process for him. He did not bat an eyelid, and I would be stressing so much over the fact that I made a mistake in this car that I'm never going to restore because I'm not a mechanic, and we all know that would end in a fire. But yeah, it just kind of blew my mind.
Yeah.
But he was so nonchalant about the whole mistakes thing. And I was like, you're factoring in mistakes into your process. What on earth?
Yeah. And that's so almost countercultural in terms of, especially for someone who's semi-recently completed high school and still in that university sort of tertiary education process. Like, I think our whole structure really puts so much emphasis on, getting things right and comparison and quantitative measurement, and it's kind of like he's doing formative assessment with himself in the way that he's assessing his car and its functionality, and let me go, oh, actually, that's not quite right. So what do I do next to fix that? And I think that's amazing.
Yeah. I've gathered from conversations with him that I barely understand that that's part of the process of engineering, is just trial and error. But I also just bring this up as food for thought. He was homeschooled almost his entire life. And I just wonder if being outside the formal New South Wales education system,
no competition with your peers,
no competition with his peers at all, and he was free to do whatever content suited his ability. So in some things he was accelerated, some things he wasn't. It just occurred to me then that possibly if his mum, who was his teacher, instilled a certain ideology in him, whether she intended to or not, that has, for the better, influence the way he views performance and mistakes and that kind of thing. But also being an engineer, you do need to trial everything. But
that's the whole problem-solving approach that I am constantly trying to instill in my students. It's because the students that take my subject are often the ones that say that they want to become engineers and things like that. And so you do have to have that kind of problem-solving approach and being comfortable with making mistakes and evaluating the outcome, or even making something that's not a mistake, still being able to determine how it could be improved. And like this whole notion of comparison and standardized assessment and what is that really for, whether you know it or not, whether you're aware of it or not, our educational ideology or our opinion of what education is for and what assessment is for absolutely shapes how we're running our classroom, the way that we're speaking to our students. And we've talked about things like that before, and our ideas and opinions and what impact that has. And even the Black and William guys say that it's unhelpful to assume that assessment is like merely a secondary influence on classroom practice. Like, what we're doing as teachers is constantly being shaped by the way that our ideologies and our school's ideologies and our state's ideologies on education is like shaping assessment. And I mean, remember, even like NAPLAN practice tests, you remember doing those?
Gosh,
and like everyone says, like, oh, it doesn't matter, like NAPLAN, it's just to tell us where you're at, like it's not a big deal. And yet, like, let's do a practice test every day and let's make sure that you do really well in it so that it reflects good on us.
And even the fact that you can practice for a test makes me so angry.
Yes. And it's the same with the HSC, and I'm becoming more and more like acutely aware of how I just feel I'm teaching to the test. I know that my performance as a teacher will be judged based on how my students go. Their performance as like a person feels like it's judged. And, they can be told that their ATAR doesn't matter and it's just a number and that doesn't define you and all those sorts of things.
And it's literally a rank.
But our system, like, literally reinforces the opposite.
Yeah.
Our system that they are in tells them that you are being ranked against other people. This is how good you are. And you have to perform to the best of your ability. And so I find that, and even the other day I was actually devastated because I'd finished teaching a unit of work with my HSC class and I thought, yep, cool, we've covered everything. I've checked off the syllabus like multiple times, made sure this is my first time teaching the theory for this course. So, I was trying to be really diligent, make sure I've got everything done. And then I thought, all right, I might just print off a couple of past papers and look through the questions on that particular topic and we'll go through some as examples. Half of them I knew that they wouldn't be able to answer because the way that I'd interpreted the syllabus was not the same as the kinds of questions that the markers were asking, as in like, it felt like the exam was written based on what the textbook said rather than based on what the syllabus said. And so there were some really specific questions that were asking for information that's not really even in the syllabus, but, could be examples of things that elaborate on the syllabus, but I hadn't used those particular examples. I'd used other ones. And so already I just felt like, okay, well, my whole interpretation of this is wrong. I may as well just use the exams as the guide for what to teach, because if I don't prepare them for that, that's ultimately the final measure of both them and me.
And how are we supposed to inspire flexible and creative thinking if there's one right answer and you're punished for thinking a little bit differently about a question or using different examples because that's not specifically what the exam was aiming towards, what the marker was looking for? Like, we want people in business to be, vibrant and dynamic and adaptable and flexible, but we're teaching them to be the opposite. It just boggles the mind.
It does boggle the mind.
It grates my cheese, as I like to say, fries my bacon. It means I get real mad.
Yeah. It's really challenging to think about assessment and the role that it plays and how it's shaping what we're doing in schools. Like, you can have great, maybe unique, original, dynamic teaching practice and, do all sorts of really creative and different things. And, there's actually a lot of scope, at least here in New South Wales, to be quite flexible with how you interpret the curriculum and how you conduct assessment and things from K to 10. But as soon as you're in stage 6, it's the playing field is different. The rules are different. We are going standardized now because you have to be comparable with everyone. And it's impossible to ignore that, because especially if you're in a place that is promoting academic excellence or has one of those scholar academic ideologies, you can't ignore the HSC even in the lower years. You're backwards mapping to think about what do we need them to be able to do in the HSC? How can we be preparing them for that now in year 7 or in year 5 or whatever? And everything we do, I think, no matter how original or creative we're trying to be, is still to some degree shaped by the standardized testing that's in place in our environment.
I just have one more thing that's frustrating me, is that approach it's so unrealistic and just teaches students that they're a commodity or they're an object or they are their mark.
It also turns us into a bit of a commodity, because if we aren't performing or if we aren't getting the results for the students, then we aren't good teachers. And no wonder there's burnout, because people are expected to live up to these extreme expectations and pressures of accountability in unreasonable forms. And we have to boil everything that we do down to numbers. And I know that there's a place for data, and I actually love doing data analysis sometimes when the data is there, but it's annoying and infuriating to have to try and structure and adjust what we're doing just for the purpose of trying to collect data so that we can be held to account and we've got something to show for it.
Yeah, it feels like someone's always, I don't know who this someone is, Nessa or someone is just looming in the background I will ask you to prove what you've done.
Yeah.
And I can understand that some degree of accountability and data production and generation is so important, because otherwise you'd have schools, doing whatever the heck they wanted.
Totally.
But the degree that we've taken it to, it's just ridiculous. And it just kills the human spirit. Why are we doing this to each other? And I can hear my little social sciences brain going, capitalism is evil. But I'll leave that for another time.
Good idea. Yeah, one of the last things I thought it would be interesting just to reflect on in this culture we're in, where we're trying to provide data, and that data normally comes through summative assessment inferences. It kind of also means that all of our formative assessment is just feeding to our summative assessment, right? We are checking in with how our students are going because we want to make sure that they've understood it, because when we assess them on it, we want them to do well.
Yeah, it's the summative assessment is the grand final.
Yeah.
And we're doing all this training with the formative assessment so that we can do well in the summative, but that's not quite what we have said we want the purpose of assessment to be. Yeah, the whole argument is that it doesn't really matter what the content or type of the assessment. It's what you are doing with it. And
exactly.
I would like to do an experiment where you use the same assessment at different stages in the unit.
Yeah.
And the different types of data that you would be able to draw based on the lens you're looking at it through, which is actually, funnily enough, the whole basis of inquiry learning is that you choose a conceptual lens, which then becomes the angle that you approach a different topic from. So looking at the case study of a specific artist, you might draw different inferences based on whether you're looking at it through the lens of identity or through change or through discovery. You would focus on different things. And that's kind of the same thing with summative and formative assessment. It's kind of the lens you're looking at the students' work through.
Yes, you can be looking at the same task, the same output that they've given you with a formative lens and go, all right, there's misconceptions here, or they've really grasped that. That's with your formative lens on. The summative lens tells you what they've learnt. And the same piece of work can do that. What I think is really interesting about how our current school, I guess, formats, the normal formats of, having a formal assessment every term or end of year exams, those kinds of things, is because the argument is, well, they have to do that for the HSC, so we need to start preparing them.
I'm rolling my eyes.
And again, even when we have this quote-unquote flexibility or autonomy to be creative and original with the way that we sort of run and develop the curriculum and the pedagogy of our classrooms, it's all impacted and driven by the ideologies and assessments that we don't have any control over. Look,
could go on and on and on.
We probably could, but it's time to get down off the soapbox. Thank you for listening if you've made it this far. And we just hope that maybe this has given you some things to think about in relation to how you're running assessment in your classroom. Maybe not so much tips or strategies, but just some food for thought in thinking about how you're using assessment and what is actually shaping your assessment, and how you are seeing your role as a curriculum maker and an assessment designer in your context.
If you like this episode and you want more teaching together, which we know you do because we're amazing, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Teaching Together the Podcast. We are on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. We are on iHeartRadio. If you really love us, we'd love for you to give us some stars or even a written review. That would be amazing. But stay tuned for more amazing content coming next fortnight.